right now, we want to welcome to the show from the University of Canterbury, Professor Michael Plank. I'm going to say friend of the show. Michael, thanks for joining us, mate.
Kia ora, Pat.
I appreciate you giving us some time this morning. Thank you. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where we are at the moment with COVID. You and I have chatted before, and we've chatted about modelling. We've chatted about, where we're projected to go and where we are going. I guess from your perspective, as someone who's been involved in the modelling, how are we doing right now based on how we thought we would be doing?
I think we've tracked pretty closely to how we thought we would be doing. Once the Omicron wave started off in New Zealand, in terms of things like the number of people in hospital, the size of the peak, and that sort of thing. We are in a long tail now, and that's something we always expected. It's something that the models don't necessarily always do a good job with, because I think the reasons for that long tail are quite complex, and they're to do with people's behaviour to some extent, which is always a tricky thing to try and model. But that's the stage we're in now. Cases have been coming down, but they are starting to come down slower and slower as we move into a situation where COVID is the new normal, really. I mean, we're not going to get back down to the sorts of numbers of cases that we had over summer, for example. I think we'll continue to see case numbers in the thousands, certainly through the winter period.
I was listening to an epidemiologist, and forgive me, I can't remember which one it was, the other day, talking about our baseline will be about 5,000 a day. And they were saying it's 1,000 cases per million people was the model that they were using to say would be about a baseline. Now, I'm in Southern DHB, and in the Southern DHB, there are 300,000 people. That means that model, if that's the right word, well, that projection means we should be getting about 300 cases a day based on that 1,000 per million. Now, we're still getting 900 a day here in Southern. I had a chat with Susie Wiles a couple of Fridays ago, and one of the frustrating things for me is the whole country going to orange, when here in the deep south, we're still getting 3 times what the projected sort of flat line would be. And now that I'm seeing, and let me put this up here, seeing the 7-day average start to tick back up again, and conversations and articles that we're seeing on places like stuff talking about the second wave, I'm wondering, I'm concerned that we're going to kind of be in this malaise of not at that base level, which we've been told is about what it should be, and not at a peak big enough to do anything about for the rest of the year. And I'm having conversations in my household, which is like, fuck, are we now at a point where we're just going to, okay, so like, because I've been a strong proponent of, I don't want to catch this thing. I'm taking precautions not to. I'm not shutting myself off to the world, but I'm reducing risk areas. But it's like, I feel like I can only do that for so long. Am I going to give up that 3 or 4 months of work that I've put in to stay safe and keep my little community safe, and then go out and catch it next week, which means all my work feels like it's sort of negated? I kind of feel a bit let down by the government. That's a part of it. But also I'm concerned to see these numbers and trying to figure out, I'm trying to plan what I'm going to do for the next few months as well. Like, what do we do? What are we seeing in the numbers?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are in this situation at the moment, and it is really tough because it's not just the rest of the year, it's the rest of your life. COVID's not going away. This thing is going to still be here. And I have to say it, I think the vast majority of people will catch COVID, and they will probably catch COVID multiple times during their lives. Now, that's not to say that everything's inevitable and we should be fatalistic and we shouldn't do anything to try and control COVID, because we absolutely should. But we are moving into a new normal now where COVID isn't going to go away. And it was really important that we took that precautionary approach during the first wave, because we really needed to limit pressure on healthcare systems and flatten the curve and reduce the size of that peak. That was crucial. But we're moving into the marathon now. We need to move into a way of managing this as a long-term public health issue that is going to be with us for the foreseeable future.
But what's different about it? Like, I've said this before on the show, my father got polio in 1948. and that's gone away. Smallpox, that's gone away. Vaccines can deal with these things. What's so different about COVID that we're now thinking, as you've just said, it depresses me beyond belief. I'm like, oh, well, if this is for the rest of our lives multiple times, then we might as well all just go and get it now. I mean, it's the first time I've said that publicly because I don't kind of believe it, but I think that we've seen many serious infectious diseases and viruses be put to bed through vaccines. What's different about COVID?
It's the this is not my main area, but I can
Sure,
talk
sure,
to it
sure.
a little bit, which is that for things like measles and some of those other viruses, smallpox, that we have managed to either get rid of completely or to sort of effectively eliminate. The vaccines that we have and the immunity that you get from infection is really strong, and it stops you from getting infected again. That's not the case with COVID. We know that it's quite possible for you to get infected after having been vaccinated, and we also know increasingly that it is possible to be infected again after you've had the virus previously. So it's the nature of the virus. These seasonal coronaviruses, you don't get lifelong immunity either from vaccination or from infection. And the same with flu, right? I mean, we have flu
Yeah, yeah.
vaccines, but the way that the virus evolves means that we're never able to completely get rid of it. And so and I don't want to underplay vaccines. The vaccines are still incredibly important because they stop you getting seriously ill, but they're not going to stop you from being infected for the rest of your life, like a measles vaccine would do a good job of doing.
It's a different message all of a sudden, isn't it? I mean, we didn't know at the start what was going on, and then now it feels very different. It's actually slightly depressing, this conversation, what we've just said about where we're going to go from here. Because, I mean, if we think about it being around forever, my words, not yours exactly, it's like that means all of those vulnerable people who we've been trying to protect at some stage are likely going to get it. And what does that mean for their health and for people who are, or does that mean all of us, if it's going to be around for 30 years, who are in our 40s now, who are then going to be our 70s, are all going to get it more seriously later on? And you know what I mean? It's just, it's quite a depressing conversation now. That not you what you've said, but the idea behind having to deal with this for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a bit depressing. It's not a nice virus.
No.
But I mean, if you have infections, if you have reinfections, if you're infected multiple times, you will have some immunity from that, and that immunity will massively reduce the chance of getting severely ill with the virus. So, I mean, I'm hesitant to compare it to flu because it's not
Sure.
flu; it's more
Yeah,
infectious than flu, and I
yeah.
think it's probably going to be a bigger public health threat than flu is. But we don't go out and try and catch flu. We try and avoid getting the flu. And if someone's got the flu, please stay at home. Don't come out. I don't want to see you. You don't want to be spreading flu around.
Yeah.
But at the same time, probably accept that you're going to get flu at some point, but you still try and take actions to prevent that. And those actions are really important.
I'd really like to ask you, I haven't necessarily prepped you for this, but I'd like to ask you about something to do with where we stand in the world now with our COVID cases. And I feel like, you being a modeler and being in the mathematics department, this might be an area that you can explain to me because I kind of don't understand what's happened here. New Zealand was lauded as this country in the world that was doing better than anybody for a long time, primarily. And if you look at our population on these charts that we're being shown, like the one I have up here about COVID, we ended up being about the 120th country in the world when it comes to population. And when it came to our COVID response and our total cases, we were like 195th in the world. So in other words, we were far lower on the scale than what our population size was. So we were doing very well per capita. Now, since Omicron's come in, we've gone from 195th in the world, and as you can see, I'm looking at the live numbers here, to 64th in the world. So again, if we're the 120th-ish country in the world when it comes to population, to be at 60th seems to be that per capita we're not doing as well now, because you'd expect it to be 100 120th country should be sitting at the 120th place, all things being equal. But it's not just that we're not doing as well numbers wise. I'm wondering, as an ignorant person when it comes to statistics and mathematics, to go from being 195th in the world to 64th in the world, at the same time the rest of the world has also had Omicron. So in my mind, I kind of go, well, if they've all had it, all their numbers will go up proportionally as well. Does this mean that we've had Omicron affecting New Zealand particularly badly when it comes to case numbers? Because we haven't just jumped to where we are in the world of 120th, we've gone beyond that to 64th in the world when we were 195th in the world. And I look at that now and go, we're not the shining light anymore when it comes to case numbers. We still are very good when it comes to deaths. Let's make that clear. But when it comes to case numbers, we're not the shining light anymore. And I'm wondering why. Does anything in the numbers or the modeling explain that?
I think by and large we've experienced a similar Omicron wave to lots of other places. In terms of the case numbers, cases are a bit difficult because it's subject to testing and people getting tested, but also in terms of the health impacts, the number of hospitalizations that we've had in the Omicron wave. We're in the same boat really now as many other countries. We did really, really well. We avoided the horrendous death tolls that many other countries have seen in the pre-vaccine era. The combination of vaccines and Omicron has changed the game now. We're in a fundamentally different situation now to what we were in March of 2020. But yeah, we are. We're no longer any different than anywhere else, really. We have Omicron. We've had an Omicron wave very similar at a broad level to most other countries, and we're going to continue to experience this similar sorts of outcomes that other countries are doing going forward, I think.
When you say we're no different, we're getting the same thing as all the other countries. Does that therefore, when it comes to case numbers, purely the case numbers that we've had, because we've jumped so far up the scale? I mean, I'm actually having a look as I talk to you about the numbers. I should bring it back up so people know what I'm looking at. And it looks like there aren't below us, like below 64 in the world. There doesn't seem to be any sort of, if I can say, similar countries, Commonwealth countries, primarily, I guess, Western democracies below us. I mean, there are some, but there doesn't seem to be many. Does that mean that compared to our like-minded countries, and I'm thinking about, the Australias and the Americas and the UKs and the South Africas and the ones that are kind of we're compared to often, we're still doing quite well? I'm still kind of confused as to how we've jumped from 195th in the world to 64th in the world when everyone else has been through it, and why it seems to have impacted us numbers-wise so badly.
I mean, I think this way of looking at it as a ranking system is probably not the best thing to do. I mean, if you want to compare countries, really look at the rates per 100,000, something like that. So, the number of cases per 100,000 population, or the number of deaths per 100,000 of population. And if you look at those sorts of measures, I think we're really middle of the pack compared to other comparable countries like European countries or Australia or the US or Canada in terms of experience from the Omicron wave.
So just for clarity, 72nd. Total cases per million population, 72nd. And our population would put us at 126. So, look, I mean, I know it's maybe there's an unanswerable question. Maybe lots of those other countries aren't reporting their numbers the same. Who knows? But it did give me a shock the other day when I saw we had jumped up so high, just based on how we had been performing. And I just wondered if there's a reasonable explanation behind this. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's always a hard way to finish off, but where to from here? I mean, what's the modeling showing us from here, especially with that 7-day average looking like it's increasing?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky to know what to make of case numbers at the moment because we've had those 2 long weekends which have
Right.
thrown the numbers out a bit. So, I mean, I'd be surprised if we saw a big second wave now. We might see a bit of a blip, school holidays, Easter, long weekends, and things. But overall, I think the trend is still downward, but it's certainly getting slower. And I think we are likely to see a second wave at some point. Exactly when is very difficult to say, but it's quite likely that we would get a second wave at some point during the winter or spring. One thing that is a bit concerning at the moment is the age distribution of the cases. It's really important that we keep a close eye on who is getting infected, not just the total case numbers, because because case numbers have dropped quite sharply in the younger age groups, but they've actually dropped more slowly, or even stayed quite close to the peak in the over 60s and over 70s. And of course, these groups are much higher risk. And
let me just spell out what we're looking at for people who are joining us. You can see that from under 10-year-olds is tailing down, under 20-year-olds is tailing down. Basically 20 to 50 is kind of staying pretty static, but above 50 to 59, 60 to 69, that you can see that they're all tailing up. So as a percentage or proportion of the overall cases, they're all rising, which is what you're talking about. So the older age demographics are becoming a bigger proportion of the daily cases. The middle-aged people, shall we say, are staying about neutral, and the younger people are starting to drop off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and this will potentially contribute to hospital numbers staying high and deaths staying high for longer. It's part of that longer tail, because these older age groups are just inherently higher risk.
Yeah, and I guess that comes back to that idea about looking after your nan and papa, and when people have changed their perspective, and like we were just talking to George earlier, who works at Otago University, that there's far fewer masks. I've got 2 kids at 2 different schools, and we've been told, I think, that we're not going to be enforcing mask laws anymore, and I'm just like, oh, it feels like, I mean, maybe my naivety is hoping to get rid of this. I did hear someone internationally say, we misunderstood this because we thought everyone would go inside for a month and this thing would be gone forever. And of course, everyone didn't go inside for a month. They decided to stay out and do things and continue to go to hairdressers behind closed doors and various bits and bobs, and it's hung around. And that I think one of the big concerns for me, and one of the concerns around the numbers today, is almost the attitude towards it of everyone throwing their hands up in the air. I know groups of people, although I think it's 1 in 5 people in Southern have had COVID. A lot of people are saying it's 2 to 3 times the number, probably. So it could be up to 3 in 5. So maybe 50 to 60% of people in Southern have had it. And obviously, I'm only talking about Southern because they're the stats I look at to impact me. So let's say half of the people have had it and half haven't. I know groups of people, some that are particularly, against things like vaccines, where 90% within a group have had it. And it's like, I struggle sometimes to be gracious, because I'm like, if you catch this thing and you're looking after yourself and you're taking precautions, I feel bad for you. If you're basically, just throwing to the wind, going, I don't believe in this stuff, I don't like this stuff, and 90% of you are getting it within a group, I'm like, I struggle to be gracious to people and not think you guys are the main reason that this thing is freaking hanging on. And I don't want Nan and Papa to get sick and die, especially looking at the numbers that we're just talking about them going up. And we need to look after one another better. Still, although the message from the government is orange, you have more freedom. So there's a disparity there in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I completely agree with the comment about, we need to look after each other. We need to particularly be aware of high risk groups. Visiting elderly relatives, visiting aged residential care, this sort of thing. These are the highest risk people in our society, and we really we can't let our guard drop, because there are still high levels of COVID out there, and so, really being aware of that risk when you're interacting with people in those groups, and taking the appropriate precautions. Wear a mask. If you feel at all sick, don't go. But just because you feel fine, don't assume you're clear. If you're visiting aged residential care, I think it's a good idea to do a RAT beforehand, if you can, to just give you that extra layer of protection.
So the payoff from this is, if this is going to be around for a lot longer, however long that is, in its various forms and variants, what we need to change for our attitude for society is, like, we've all been in situations, I'm sure, whether it was when you're a student and a part-time worker, or whether it was a full-time worker, where you've been sick and your boss has said there's no one to replace you, you really do need to come in. There needs to be an attitude change where if you're sick, you stay home, and bosses and employers need to be like, yep, sweet as, you're sick, stay at home, we'll make it work. And also, as you say, like we've had examples during this peak of, people turning up with their kids, meeting with other kids, and everyone's sick in the family. It's like, actually, this is the way that we avoid it while we can, and to go from there. So I think that's the caring for one another now, to me, feels a bit more like, if you're sick, don't come. If you're sick,
Yeah.
don't go. If you're in a position of, like, if you're a principal or if you're a boss and someone has to be away, a student then you allow that to happen. Maybe part of the policy changes need to be more sick days. Most
Yeah.
full-time workers have 5, 6 sick days a week. Maybe that needs to be
Yeah.
extended now, as a way that therefore we can, have those choices to keep others well around us and ourselves. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sick leave entitlement is absolutely crucial. And
Yeah.
it's not just for COVID, it's for other respiratory viruses and nasties that we have spreading around, particularly during winter. So certainly making sure that people don't feel obligated to go into work when they're sick is absolutely crucial.
This could ironically work the other way. I mean, I remember watching QI, Stephen Fry on QI. He's a very smart man, and I think gives out good information most of the time. And he talked about, when smoking was on planes, the air was actually cleaner because of the system that they had in place to have to clean the air when smoking was on the planes than it is now. Now, I accept that that's probably true because it was done as a fact on QI, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I wonder now, with this thing being around, with this bad thing being around, that we may actually be healthier if we take the attitude of looking after other people. And actually, I am feeling a bit sick, so I won't go. Whereas in 2018, if we were feeling a bit sick, we went anyway. So I wonder if kind of the reverse could happen if we took the attitude of still thinking about looking after other people and doing it by not passing on whatever sniffle or thing that we had, we just won't go. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think having a focus on clean air and good ventilation in our buildings is really
Yeah,
important for COVID, and that has benefits for other things as well. So if that reduces the amount of flu that's going around during the winter, the amount of RSV, the potential for measles outbreaks, because people are worried about measles vaccination rates having fallen during the pandemic. So we're prone to measles outbreaks, but those sorts of measures focusing on clean air and also on the sick leave entitlement
yeah,
will have benefits across the board. So it's not just for COVID. So these are the sorts of measures we need to be looking at.
yeah,
They're sustainable long-term protections that mitigate against COVID, but
yeah.
also reduce the risk from other things and just generally result in a healthier society.
Yeah, and that feels like that's the policy change. I mean, the government can't just, whatever government's in 18 months, you can't just go, right, everyone's got their freedoms now, go to it. You got to go, everyone's got their freedoms now. But because of the change of the world right now, as we're living in this world, we need to now also give you guys the ability to stay home if you need to because you're sick. There needs to be like an addendum to that. Everyone's got their freedoms now. And that's where policy comes in.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us again today. We really appreciate when you come on board and educate me, even if no one else gets anything. But I enjoy speaking to you, and I appreciate you giving us some more time this morning.
Thanks, my pleasure.